Welcome to Your Mac Life for Wednesday, May the 3rd, 2017. This is show number 1133. Thank you guys very much for joining me here. I am Shawn King. Whether you're listening to the archive or tuned in with all the cool kids listening in live, thank you guys very much for listening to the show. As always, we encourage you to go to our IRC chat room. You can go to the website at yourmaclifeshow.com, and right there at the bottom, you can, right there below the video, you can see the IRC chat room. Our friend Monty set that up for us. Real easy to join the IRC. All you do is put in a name, any name you'd like, and it drops you into the IRC chat room right below the video. You can also join us in a Slack chat room. If you're a Slack user, it's yourmaclife.slack.com. If that doesn't work, and it doesn't for some folks, send me an email to Shawn at yourmaclifeshow.com, and I will send you a personal invite as to how to get into our Slack chat room. On tonight's show, I'll talk to our good friend Jim Dalrymple about Apple and the earnings that they released yesterday. There's some soft spots there, particularly iPhone, but not really soft. China was down again significantly. This is quite a big drop over the last 2 years in China, but Tim Cook didn't seem awfully concerned about it. We'll talk about that with Jim later on in the show. We're also going to talk about, in our starting point photography segment, RAW versus JPEG. They're basically two file formats that your camera shoots in. And there's good and bad to both the RAW file format and the JPEG file format. And we'll talk about those two formats later on in the show. I don't think I've ever done this before. It's happened for years, but it's first time I think I've mentioned it. May is, at least here in North America, I don't know about Europe or Asia, May is Motorcycling Awareness Month. And what that means is that many motorcycle organizations, the American Motorcycling Association, the Motorcycling Canada, get together to, because springtime is when a lot of folks start riding again. Here in North America, the weather is starting to get better. I personally ride year-round. I went out riding today, as a matter of fact, and have done for the last several weeks. But a lot more riders appear in the month of May, and so these organizations try to raise awareness as to remind you that motorcycles are on the road again, and for you to keep an eye out for them. And we would appreciate it. And I granted, there are a not small proportion of motorcyclists who are assholes, who make ridiculous amounts of noise, who will speed, who will do dangerous things. And yes, that's a given. But the vast majority of motorcyclists, just like the vast majority of people in cars, are safe and responsible riders. The problem is that we're also riding a fairly small vehicle and are hard to see quite often. Motorcyclists, for whatever reason, fashion or custom tradition, often wear black. I do. I'll be the first one to admit it. I have a black motorcycle. I've got black leather jacket. I've got jeans on. My helmet has got a yellow stripe, but it's a mostly black helmet. So I'm not doing what I should do to make myself more visible. And that's on me. I understand that. But according to the latest statistics available from the NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic and Safety Association, I think, in the United States, 4,976 people were killed in 2015 on motorcycles, up 8.8% from the year before. This is out of a reported 8.6 million private and commercial motorcycles on the road. That's a 27% more likely chance to die and be injured on a motorcycle than if you were in a car, which makes perfect sense. When you crash on a motorcycle, you're not surrounded by airbags, you're not surrounded by crumple zones, you're not surrounded by steel and metal. You are basically thrown off the vehicle to skid and slide and run into things. 33% of riders killed were a direct result of the rider speeding. 40% of the riders killed in 2015 were not wearing a helmet. And again, those are on the rider. If you're speeding and or not wearing a helmet, you're taking a very risky activity and making it riskier. And that's on you as a rider. But 60% of all motorcycle accidents that involve another vehicle are from cars. The other vehicle is a car, and I think something along the lines of 30 to 40% of those car accidents are from a car turning left in front of a motorcycle. And what happens is, quite often you hear people say, I didn't see him. You're looking down the road and looking left to cross the intersection, and you just literally do not see the motorcycle. So many motorcyclists will get injured and killed in those kinds of accidents. So all we're doing is asking folks to take a little extra time this time of year, all through the summer, look for motorcycles, look for that one headlight, that one bike coming at you. The other issue with motorcycles is our perception of speed, and this is a scientific fact, our perception of speed is different with cars that have two headlights versus a motorcycle with one headlight and is smaller. You think they're going slower than they actually are. Even if they're doing the speed limit, a motorcycle seems to be going slower than what an equivalent car would do. So what happens is the car, if they do see the motorcycle, doesn't think he's going that fast, and they turn in front of the motorcycle. Or they think, oh, there's plenty of room, I can cut in front of this guy. But the motorcycle is going faster than you thought it was, and he hits you, or you become an obstacle and he hits you. A lot of motorcycle accidents are also in curves. The 65% of all single vehicle motorcycle accidents are in curves. And it's often where the motorcycle goes around a curve and the rider doesn't turn the bike and he ends up going straight and runs off the curve. So there's all kinds of different ways for motorcyclists to get hurt. We have to minimize the danger as much as we can, as much as we are able to. For me personally, when I come up to an intersection, I slow down. I look for cars that are turning left. I look for cars that are coming out of malls on my right. I look for cars that are turning right from the other intersection. I slow down, and they do this thing called cover your brakes. So you have your hands out, and your right hand is over top of your brake pedal, and your foot is, and on a motorcycle, this what's that called? Stick, handlebar, gear, lever. That's it. This lever operates the front brakes, and your right foot operates the rear brakes. So I'm ready to come to a stop in case a car moves in front of me. To be a good motorcyclist, you have to be constantly aware of the situation around you. But even the best, safest motorcyclist in the world can still get taken out. It's still an incredibly, incredibly dangerous thing to do. There's a guy named Larry Gradowski, who back in the early 2000s was the recognized authority on motorcycle safety. He wrote a couple of great books about it. I learned a lot from him. And Larry died on a motorcycle riding through Texas when a deer jumped out in front of his bike and knocked him off it and killed him. This was the safest guy in the world. And yet he still got taken out by a deer riding all by himself in the middle of nowhere in Texas. So motorcyclists have to accept the risk, have to understand the risk, have to also minimize the risk. But we also need help from car drivers to make themselves more aware of the fact they're now sharing the road with motorcyclists. I've told folks, MacMan says, like lane splitting doing 80, which is illegal as hell in most states. No, it's illegal as hell in every state except California. It's illegal as hell everywhere in Canada. It's only legal in Europe and in Asia. It's not, I think Africa too. It's not legal anywhere in North America except in California. I've been riding a motorcycle. I've had my license for 12 years now. I've been riding for about 7 of those years. And in those 7 years, I've had 18 near accidents. And by a near accident, what I mean by that is that if I hadn't done something, I would have gotten into the accident. It was that close. But I've always said that 95% of all motorcycle accidents are the fault of the motorcyclist. Because what we have to do as motorcyclists is make up for the lack of awareness of other people. We have to make up for the fact that they may not be paying attention, that they may be in their own metal cocoon, not looking around, not doing shoulder checks, not checking the mirrors, not looking behind them, and just may not see you. I remember in Nashville, I was going down I-24 in Nashville. I'm in the fast lane, and I'm not going super fast. I'm doing the speed limit, maybe a little bit above. And I'm just cruising along, and there's a minivan in the center lane. And I was on the minivan's left rear quarter panel. And the minivan, I should have seen. There was a mom and there was 2 kids in the back seat. And I should have seen mom looking over her shoulder and talking to the kids or telling the kids to be quiet, whatever she was doing. And she looked up and then she changed lanes. She didn't signal. She didn't look over her shoulder. She just moved into my lane. And luckily enough, I wasn't going too fast. And there was enough room even though there was a concrete divider next to me, for me to get out of her way and get on the brakes and get behind her. But that was my fault, because I should not have been in that position. I put myself into danger by being in that position, by being in that blind spot of the driver. I got pulled over for speeding one time in Tennessee because I had just blown past this semi-trailer at like 150 kilometers an hour, probably 100 miles an hour. And as I blow past the semi, there was a cop in the Meridian, and he lit me up and pulled over. And the cop comes over and says, do you know how fast you're going? I said, honestly, officer, no, I was trying to get past that semi as fast as I possibly could. And the cop looked at me and said, why? I said, well, officer, you know how when you go past a semi, you can feel the wind blast of the semi. He says, yes. I said, well, on a motorcycle, that wind blast could knock you off your bike. It could suck you underneath the semi. And if I'm riding next to the semi, one of his tires could blow out. And you've seen those, what we call tire gators on the road. If you run over one of those tire gators on a motorcycle, you go down. If one of those tire gators blows up, if one of those tires blows up and a chunk of tire hits you in the head on your motorcycle, you go down. So I tell all my friends who ride, never stay beside a semi. Always go as fast as you can. Either stay behind the semi or get in front of it. Do not sit beside it, because you're increasing your risk. And I told the cop, I said, I'm sorry, I was speeding, officer, but I needed to get past that semi as fast as I could. And just as we did that, just as we were having that conversation, a semi blows past us, and we both sort of rocked by the wind blast of the semi. I said, see, that's what I'm talking about. And the cop was like, okay, all right, just slow it down next time. And I was like, in my head, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to continue to go as fast as I can past every semi I ever meet. So there's Dr. Dream says, Shawn, you're talking great safe driving advice for all. Keep that going. It's one of the problems we have nowadays, and this is why, for those folks who listen to the show for any length of time, know I'm always railing on all these devices we have in our cars now that distract someone from looking through the windshield. I come at it from the point of view of a motorcyclist. As a motorcyclist, we're generally more aware of what's going on in cars. When I drive by a car, I look in to see what they're doing, to see if they're, fiddling with the radio or trying to get a snack or whatever it is, because that makes me more afraid of what they're liable to do. And we see people on their cell phones all the time. I'd be willing to bet that 8.8% increase in motorcycle deaths over the last year, a lot of those are probably due to distracted driving of some kind. So these devices that are in cars, anything that makes you not focus on driving this 2-ton chunk of steel down the road upsets me, because it puts my life in danger. As a motorcyclist, we have to do everything we possibly can, everything you're willing to do to be as safe as possible, to enjoy the sport, but we also need car drivers to do their part too. There is no situation where there is an incident between a car and a motorcycle where the motorcycle is going to win. I say this to riders all the time. You might be right, but you'll be dead. Happened to me last week. Apparently, I must have pissed somebody off, because I suddenly look in my rearview mirror and there's this little Mazda, I swear to God, 2 feet off my rear bumper in the fast lane. And I'm going fast. I'm doing 130 kilometers an hour. Speed limit's 110 through that area. I look behind me at this guy. I'm like, what are you doing? And he is up on my rear bumper. And I got nowhere to move over to the right because it's traffic. And I'm looking behind me. What is this guy's problem? And so I start to move over, because I'm gonna get out of the guy's way, and he blows past me in my lane on my left-hand side. Now, I couldn't do anything. There's nothing I can do. I can't change my track. I can't feint to him, because all he needs to do is move that way, and I go down. I gotta let him go. There's no road rage on a motorcycle, because road rage gets you killed. Because he's got 4 wheels and 2 tons. I got 2 wheels and 600 pounds. I'm gonna lose every single time. So anyway, I just wanted to have that little rant to let you guys know that please, if you are out there riding, please keep an eye out for motorcyclists, and please keep us in mind. Keep me in mind. The guy on that bike might be you, might be me. Please don't take me out. Later on in the show, we're going to talk to a good friend. Later in the show, we're talking Starting Point Photography segment about JPEG versus RAW and what they are and why you might want to use one or the other. But up next, we'll talk to our good friend Jim Dalrymple of The Loop at loopinsight.com. This is your Mac Life. Well, theme music or not, apparently we don't got Jim tonight. I don't know where he is. He told me earlier he was going to be on the show. Oh, hang on. There he is. Wait for it. I see him on iMessage. I got the 3 dots. Come on, Jim. Come on, baby. Do. Jim. Okay, he says he needs 30 minutes. He's in a meeting. Okay, so ping me when you're out. So we won't do that segment with Jim just yet. We're going to do it a little later on. Just as a point of conversation somewhere else, did you see that someone said that Windows 10, 10S, is a gamble on the future of desktop apps? I think this is really interesting. The fact that the latest version of Windows 10S will only allow you to access apps that are available in the Windows App Store. So it's their version of a walled garden. You can pay for $50 and get I think it's the Windows Pro version. But if you buy Windows 10S, you'll only be able to use apps that come from the Microsoft App Store or that are basically browser apps. That to me is really interesting. I don't know that it's a good idea or a bad idea. As we've seen even on the Apple App Store, bad apps can still get through. It's a lot harder for them to get through, but they still can. So it's not a perfect walled garden. Is this a possibility for the Macintosh? Do you think that Apple might someday go down this path? Especially if it's the idea of spending $50 to get a door in the walled garden. I think that it works for Apple if they portray it as, look, here's a brand new laptop and it's as bulletproof as we can possibly make it. It's the most secure laptop you're going to get. That you can't, for the most part, Apple would never say this, but you can't, for the most part, get bad apps on this new walled garden laptop. But if you want the freedom to load whatever software you want to load, give us $50, $10, $20, whatever number you want to put out there, and we'll unlock the walled garden door. I don't think it's a bad idea because for the most part, most people use their laptop, I'd say, 25% of its power? 50% of its power and abilities? Most people use their laptop for web browsing, email, chatting, photos, music, maybe watching videos. Most people don't do a whole lot with their laptop than what came with their laptop, for the most part. So if Apple did this, but as long as they offered that door, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea for Windows. I think it's a good idea for Apple. I'm wondering if that's a path they're willing to go down. I wonder if that's a path that Apple is thinking about at some point in the future to, again, wall off the Mac. Remember, iOS apps are walled off. Unless you jailbreak your phone, all your iOS devices are in a walled garden. The only things that can get on it are things you can get from the App Store. So we're already kind of used to that idea. Would Apple marry that idea of an iOS walled garden to more of a Mac OS 10 walled garden? And do you think it's a good idea or bad? Mosquito says that the walled version of the OS is meant specifically for consumers. I'd agree. But cue the howls of outrage from enthusiasts. Yeah, I agree. The enthusiasts would scream bloody blue murder. Don't care. Apple's market is no longer solely for enthusiasts. It's a consumer electronics company, and they are selling the vast majority of their products to consumers. And so they're going to take care of the consumer market. But I don't think Apple would ever completely wall off iOS. completely wall off the Mac OS. Because, even now there's lots of apps you can get on the Mac OS store. But a lot of those apps are also available directly from the vendor themselves. The problem is sometimes those are not complete, but significantly different apps, because Apple requires a version of sandboxing on apps that go in the App Store, the Mac OS App Store, that vendors don't have to do if they sell you their app directly. And I always try to get my apps from the vendor directly, A, because they can be more feature rich, but B, because the vendor then gets all the money. There's no 30% given to Apple. So I like giving the money directly to vendors as much as I can. Mosquito says, I'd consider recommending a Mac to my father-in-law if it was walled up to the degree that it'd keep him safer. I think that's the key. I think that's absolutely the key, is that if you can offer a safer, not 100% safe, but a safer laptop operating system to your consumer users, why wouldn't you? This would also enable Apple to get a little bit more money out of those of us who are willing to pay it. Remember, Apple stopped charging for the OS. Well, maybe they could get some money out of people like me and a lot of you if Apple came up with another version of, let's call it OS 11, that was walled, that had significant advantages to the pay version, feature-wise. I'd pay $50 for it. We have in the past. We used to pay $120 for the Mac OS. So I think Apple could do this, and except for, as you say, the howls of the enthusiasts, I think that's a way that Apple could go. I don't know they would, but I think it's a way that they could go. Elon Musk, again, was in the news this past week. Elon Musk says we're only 2 years from being able to nap in self-driving cars. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? 2 years from self-driving cars. No chance. No chance in hell. Not even close. In 2 years, self-driving cars that, from the description he's talking about, that's basically a car where you are not in the driver's seat. Where you are in the passenger seat or in the back seat. The car might not even have a steering wheel. You would get in, you'd lie down, you'd nap, the car would take you to work. And no, that's not happening in 2 years. I can't see the technology might be able to do it, but I can't see our laws allowing it to be done yet. It's another example, we've talked about this several times, about the fact that we invent technology, but our laws take quite a bit longer to work their way through the system. I think it's at minimum 5 years before we'll have true self-driving cars. And our friend Darby Lyons, or one of the angry drunk on Twitter, says something I think is absolutely true. The only sane future for autonomous vehicles is one where the vast majority are part of ride-sharing and public transportation fleets. That I agree with 100%. 100%, because I think the self-driving car future and the ride-sharing car future are one and the same. I think we are rapidly, within our lifetimes, within the next 10 to 20 years, going to see a drastic reduction in the number of personal cars, especially for those folks who live in cities. Country folks are still going to need vehicles. They're still going to need work vehicles, trucks and pickups and SUVs. But city people, remember, the vast majority of us who drive to work, we get in our cars, we drive 30 minutes, 45 minutes to the office, we park that car, go into the office from 9 to 5, so that's 8 hours where the car just sits there. We get back in the car, we drive 30, 45 minutes back home, park the car, and the car sits there for another 10 hours. So 16 hours of the day, your car is doing nothing except costing you money. Wouldn't it be great if you could have a car that would only be used to take you from work to home and home to work and maybe to the grocery store with no monthly payments? Wouldn't that make much, much more sense? For the vast majority of people, Sherry says, so like a cab? Yeah, it's like a cab, except a lot cheaper, obviously. I think that that's the future, where the vast majority of us won't own a car. We will rent a car. We will ride share a car. And in that case, those ride sharing cars could very easily be self-driving. Like public transit could be self-driving. For a lot of folks, there's no need to have a car at their disposal 24 hours a day, because you only need it for an hour a day, 2 hours a day maybe, depending on where you live and where you're driving. I think that makes a lot more sense. It's not going to happen, tomorrow. It's not certainly going to happen in the 2 years that Elon Musk thinks. As Wayne says in the Slack chat room, they want the convenience, or think they do. I think that's the key. It's the think they do segment. It's very much the reason why electric cars have been so slow in taking off. People think they want a long-range vehicle. They think they want a car with battery life that will last them 800 miles. But the vast majority of people don't go that far in any one trip. The vast majority of people don't go that far in any trip, any month. Generally, electric cars, let's say they have a range of 150 miles on one charge. Most of us only travel 30, 40 miles to get to the office. And then you could plug it in and then travel 30, 40 miles to get back home. Maybe you do a little bit of shopping, you go to the grocery store, make it 50 miles. That's plenty of charge. It's for the longer trips that you would need either a greater battery range or more and faster electric charging stations. It's the same with electric motorcycles. I rode last year the Zero electric bike, and it's only got a range of 120 miles. For a lot of motorcycles, that's what they'll do in a day. And it's a commuter bike. It's designed for the city. It's small, it's light, it doesn't have a lot of storage, it's very narrow. It's designed to take your bike just bombing around town, either going to work and back, or just going to coffee shops or meeting some friends, that kind of. It's not designed to be a long-distance touring bike. For me, the bike would be utterly useless, because I'll go 120 miles one way just to get coffee. There was when I lived in Connecticut, there was a Belgian chocolatier who lived 2 hours away, one way. It was, 110 miles? And every second weekend, I'd jump on the bike and go up there to Massachusetts, get some chocolate from this guy, and then drive back home. Electric bike wouldn't get me that far. But for the vast majority of people, electric vehicles can really be useful. So if we combine all those, electric, rideshare, self-driving, those would solve a lot of people's problems. One of the issues, though, is education. That we have to educate people that they don't drive as much as they think they do. That they don't need a car as much as they think they do. That it can be cheaper doing ride sharing and car sharing than owning a car. Owning a car is the second biggest purchase most of us are going to make in our lives, behind a house. You're talking $25,000 for a car, minimum for most people. Arcsign says, I want in-road power boost to speed electric cars ahead like in video games. That's right. I don't think right now there's enough of incentive. And this is one of the things that is very interesting. As long as gas prices stay low, these technologies don't go very far or very fast. It's when gas prices are higher that these kinds of vehicles look more attractive to a larger portion of the populace. The gas crunch in the 70s, up until then, we didn't care about miles per gallon. You know, there was caddies out there that got 8 miles per gallon. We didn't care because gas was cheap and it was plentiful and we didn't worry about it. And then the oil embargo happened in 72, 73, and we became more conscious of gas mileage. And that's why today we have cars that'll get 40, 50 miles a gallon. But as long as gas prices, at least in America, stay relatively low, there's no incentive for car drivers to get more fuel efficient and for manufacturers to get more fuel efficient. But if you go to Europe, all you see is tiny cars. That's all you see. You don't see Escalades and Expeditions in Europe. There's no Humvees in Europe. It's all smart cars and Puntos and little tiny things. A guy named Contra on Twitter said, "The future is about the future of cars is about transportation, not driving." It's a really interesting point. Most people don't like or want to drive. They find it stressful. They find it boring. They find it whatever. Most folks do not want to drive a car. They need to drive a car. They don't like public transit or they like the convenience, but the actual act of driving they don't like. But we all need transportation. Wayne says the trouble with electric cars, the assumption is the power plants are greener than gas. Here in Nova Scotia, with our coal-fired power plants, I'm not convinced that's true. And he's right. It's absolutely true. We forget that there's a supply chain of gasoline, a supply chain of electricity. We get focused on, oh, I'm not using gas in my electric car, but how much energy was used to create the electric car? How much energy is being used to create the electricity to power the electric car? As Wayne says, back home in Nova Scotia, we've got nothing but coal-fired plants. So that's not helping the environment at all. We're doing a little tiny itty-bitty bit by not emitting toxic gases out of the rear end of our cars, but the electricity we use comes from coal-fired plants back home in Nova Scotia. So there's definitely a lot more to this than meets the eye. We were talking. I saw this story on the news, and it just this happened in Austria. Police say a dozen gold bars worth $124,000 were stolen from a woman's car while she left the vehicle briefly unattended. The 12 bars were hidden in an insulated bag behind the driver's seat of the vehicle, which was parked on the main square. The press agency quoted police saying that the owner intended to use the bars in a real estate deal. They weighed about 6.6 pounds in total. The 52-year-old woman discovered the theft only 10 minutes after she had left the car. The thief or thieves didn't take the insulated bag. Raise your hand if this sounds suspicious to you. Somebody knew those gold bars were in that car. They didn't just grab the bag and run away. They knew this woman had these 12 gold bars in her car. And I'm sorry, if I've got $124,000 of anything, I'm not leaving it in my car. Insulated bag or not, hidden behind the driver's seat or not. No frickin' way. I'm carrying that shit wherever I go. I am not leaving my car. And by the way, who the hell pays for real estate in gold bars? That's the other part about that just made me go, what? That sounds really, really suspicious to me. That sounds too suspicious for words. This popped up again. Yeah, and why was it an insulated bag? It's not like it's going to melt. Yeah. This popped up again on my Twitter feed. My girlfriend wonders if tech companies like Apple could create travel settings protecting from invasive border searches. I was actually surprised to not hear anything about this on the earnings call yesterday. It's not a major point, but it's something I'd be curious to know if Apple's working on. They're not going to tell us, obviously. But with Apple's stance on privacy, I think they might be worried about getting in trouble with the government, but it would be really nice to be able to have a setting on your iPhone that basically you flip it to international travel. And it either it backs up your phone and wipes it so you can restore it later, or it locks down certain things that you have set so that border guards in any country can't surf your Facebook page, can't do all those things that we've been accusing border guards doing over the last few years. I wonder if Apple's working something like that. They haven't mentioned it. They haven't, MacMan. Apple would love that. Imagine the iCloud space they could sell. There's that too. I hadn't thought of that. We'll talk to Jim Dalrymple about this when he comes on. But Tim Cook was on Jim Cramer's Mad Money show this afternoon. I didn't get a chance to see it, but I saw a comment about it on Twitter. Tim Cook on CNBC says, "We think cord cutting is accelerating massively. It's clear what the end story looks like. We'd like to play in this." How many of you are cord cutters? How many of you no longer pay for cable TV? And what services do you use to replace that? I think one of the problems with cord cutting nowadays is the fact that to get the equivalent in content is such a giant pain in the ass. Because there's no one place you can go to get that same content. Hulu doesn't have everything. Amazon doesn't have everything. Netflix doesn't have everything. Any number of other services don't have everything. So you end up trying to piecemeal, cobble together all these different services to try to make up for what you lost in cutting the cord. And for a lot of folks, that might become more expensive than paying cable TV. It's one of the reasons why I haven't bothered very much with cord cutting. Because I know there's that hassle, but I also know that a lot of the things that I want to watch aren't available on Hulu or Amazon, things like that. I use this as an example all the time. Sports, in particular for me, my motorcycle racing. It's not available on Hulu. I'm never going to see it on Amazon. It's not on Netflix. So for those kinds of things, I still need other services. But for a lot of folks, Mosquito says that they cut the cord 10 years ago. Sherry says, I haven't paid for cable TV since college. But is it because you don't... is it because you want a cord cut? Or is it because you just don't like TV? And there's a difference there, too. I like TV. I like the idea of the mindlessness of TV. I sit in front of this computer and read and think and digest and work on things 9-10 hours a day. When I go over there to watch TV, I just want to turn my brain off. I don't want to figure out my login. I don't want to think about what I'm watching. I like my DVR where I can just turn the DVR and go, okay, that looks good. Big Bang Theory. I didn't know what day it came on. I don't know if it's on Tuesdays or Mondays or Thursdays. Don't care. Just click, watch it. Veep, click, watch it. Billions, click, watch it. American Gods. By the way, have y'all seen American Gods? Talk about mind-boggling. That literally just blow your frickin' mind. Really, really weird TV show, but really, really well done. Anyway, yeah, as MacMan says, good luck watching live sports without a cable satellite subscription. So I'm a little different in that sense. I like my live sports. I like my baseball. I like my hockey. I like my football. So the difference between people who don't like TV and they've cut the cord, that makes sense. But how many folks out there who like TV are also cord cutters? And what kind of hassles do you have to go through? It's interesting that Tim Cook says that they want to play in that space. They've got the Apple TV and they're working on any number of subscriptions, but it's still a pain in the ass. Wouldn't it be nice to just give Apple a lump sum and get the TV shows you want to get? The problem is that lump sum is liable to be greater than what you're paying your local cable provider. It's a big pain in the ass. Sly and Dave were saying, I'm still hanging on. I even have a landline. I've got a landline too, but mostly because cell phone signal out here sucks. But it's interesting. Mosquito says TV network streaming on the web is generally awful. We watch Crazy Ex-Girlfriend on the CW site. Fingers crossed that their crappy Flash player works each week. It's another issue too. All the hassles of where is this show on what browser, what subscription service, who gets it the day of, who gets it a week later, all that kind of stuff. For a lot of people, we just don't want to think that much. I'm okay with paying the cable company to not deal with all that hassle. Not having to worry about my bandwidth, not worry about whether a Flash player is working or not. I just turn my TV on and watch. So I can't see myself being a cord cutter just yet. It certainly is a possibility. But right now, I can't see it happening. Another story that was interesting that popped up last week. Supposedly, Apple, and this is a rumor, is working on person-to-person payments. Now, according to these rumors, this would be iMessage only. So basically, Mac user to Mac user. A payment thing where basically you would put in a code, you'd sign up for this service. Your friend would sign up for this service. You would link your bank account or your PayPal account or some sort of money account to your service. So would your friend. And then you would just send basically a text message that says, Apple, send $20 to Mosquito. Would you sign up for that? The first issue is linking my bank account to anybody, Apple included. That always makes me nervous. I don't want my bank account linked to anybody because God forbid something happen. I don't got a lot of money in there, but I need every dime that's in there. So God forbid someone vacuum out my bank account, I'd be royally screwed. So I tend to not, I don't have any kind of automatic payments that come out of my bank account. All my stuff is done manually. It's all done on the web, but I still all do it. I do it all manually. But if anyone's going to do it, that would make me feel good about it. It would be Apple. Not that Apple's bulletproof, not that Apple's perfect, but I trust them more than I would trust Google or Amazon or any number of other companies. A lot of folks are complaining about the fact that because this would just be Mac user to Mac user kind of thing. If I wanted to send $20 to a friend who was on Android or a PC user, I couldn't do it. Yes, I could, just not using that service. So I don't think that's much of a sticking point for me. Is it a service you'd use? Do you need to pay friends that often? I know I don't. I accept money from you guys, as always. You can subscribe to Your Mac Life at yourmaclifeshow.com. Right there on the left-hand side, you can subscribe for $2, $5, $10, $15 a month, whatever you so choose. But I don't need to do person-to-person payments all that much. Maybe if I had friends, I would. Macman says, nice segue. Thank you. You spelled segue wrong, Macman. It's S-E-G-U-E. Come on, man. But there's someone made the comment that Apple's got now $250 billion in the bank. They don't actually. It's in places all over the world. But could Apple become a bank? Would you bank at Apple? Would you have your paycheck put into Apple's account and then use that money to pay friends and family and services and that kind of stuff? Sort of like PayPal, but with Apple? I don't know. I don't know if it's something I know it's not something I need. It's not something I want to do on a regular basis. But it's something that I think that would be interesting if Apple tried to do it. One of the things that Apple announced yesterday was what was it Apple said? Apple said that the wearables business is now a Fortune 500 company. And people did the research, and the 500th of Fortune 500 companies is has revenue of $5 billion a year. So Apple's wearable market is at least $5 billion a year. Fitbit today announced their earnings, and it turns out that the Apple Watch has overtaken the Fitbit within 2 years of launch. Now, part of that is because the Fitbit has basically fallen in the toilet when it comes to sales. Take a look at the chart that Jan Dawson included in his tweet. Fitbit went from a high of, looks like in 2015, around 8 million units sold. They're now down to around 3 million units sold per quarter. Whereas Apple went from a high past quarter at Christmas, around 5 million units, and then this past earnings, these are all estimates, a little over 3,000. So Fitbit, or Apple, is now selling more devices than Fitbit is. MacMan says, not surprising. I find it a little bit surprising, if only because of the price point. You know, the cheapest Apple Watch is, I think, $300. The cheapest Fitbit's under $100. The Apple Watch does more, granted, but if a lot of folks argue that the the Apple Watch is a fitness and notification device, and the Fitbits are fitness devices. Now, I've got a clone of a Fitbit. I don't even know what it's called anymore. I got it for Christmas. And it does a decent enough job of tracking whatever it tracks and does notifications. And I got this for $30. I don't need an Apple Watch. If all I want is notifications and fitness tracking, this does that. I'm not going to spend $300 on an Apple Watch. I get the same notifications on this that you get on your Apple Watch. When someone sends me a tweet, this buzzes, and I can actually read the tweet on the little screen. When you guys are talking on Slack, this buzzes. Facebook buzzes. Email buzzes. So I can get notifications for $30. The point I'm making is some folks are making this seem like, oh, the Apple Watch has gotten huge sales-wise. But I think it's more that Fitbit has cratered. I don't know why. MacMan says, I do use a Fitbit to keep track of steps. Wrist-based step trackers are very inaccurate in my IME. I have trackers on my phone and on this device, and they're usually within 100 steps of each other. So maybe they're both inaccurate. I don't know. I don't use it as a hard and fast kind of thing. It's just more of an information of, oh, I walked that much today. And if it's off by 100 steps, I'm okay with that. If it was off by several thousand, that would be a different story. But they're generally fairly close, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't think that the Fitbit, Wayne says Fitbit really screwed their users, though. Again, Apple has that trust factor. I don't follow Fitbit. What do you mean, Wayne, that they screwed their users? Because that obviously would explain why they have cratered to a certain degree. There was a I gotta find this one. Hang on. Wayne says they were found selling user data to health insurance companies without informing them of such. I didn't know that. Okay. Apple needs the iPhone 8 to succeed more than ever. If somebody said that on Twitter, you'd ignore them. If somebody said it on Facebook, you'd ignore them. Apple needs the iPhone 8 to succeed more than ever. That's just stupid. All right? There's no other way to describe that than stupid. Apple is the world's most valuable company. Last quarter, they sold 50 million iPhones, and that's in their weakest quarter. That's with people holding off from buying a new iPhone because they think the iPhone 8 is going to be all that in a bag of chips. Apple sold more Macintoshes than they did the previous quarter. They sold fewer, yet still millions and millions of iPads. Their services business is going gangbusters. What makes you think that Apple needs the iPhone to succeed more than ever? And worse, how the hell did this story get printed in the Washington frickin' Post? I get if that's some blogger. I get if that's Gizmodo. But you would hope that smarter companies would do things smarter. Saying that the Apple needs the iPhone to succeed, the iPhone 8 is going to succeed, you asshat. There's no doubt about that. It's going to sell millions and millions and millions. Apple sold millions of iPhones in China, and they were still down 14%. You think that's going to continue forever? No, it's not. Apple sold millions of Macintoshes. You think it's going to decrease? No, it's not. There's just no reason for anybody to think that the iPhone 8 is where Apple's going to put its last flag. Dumbass. Don't think we're going to get Jim tonight. I think his meeting is going long, so we're going to move on to the starting point photography segment of the show. Sorry, hang on. Hopefully that didn't screw that up. I bet it did, but... I have to turn on duet. There's duet. Oh, hang on. Oh. I think it still works. Wow, that's surprising. Usually I do stuff like that and it just screws up on me. Your camera shoots in two different formats. One format's called JPEG, and we're all familiar with JPEG. Almost every graphic you see on the interwebs is done via JPEG. And another format called RAW. JPEG is I think RAW's been around for a long time, but JPEG's been around for a very, very long time, since the early days of the internet. And one of the advantages of JPEG, what does JPEG stand for? Joint Photographic Experts Group. And what that group did was they came up with this format where you take an image and the computer looks at the image and sees where all the commonality of colors are. And it throws away a lot of that data and leaves just one marker. And the little marker says, okay, for every 15 pixels around this marker, make it red. So rather than having 15 pixels of information, there's only 1 pixel of information. And the computer says, all right, make all that red. Now over here, make it all blue. And down here, make it all green. So rather than having 45 points, you've only got 3. It's one of the reasons why when you have an image that is a lot of one color, it will compress more as a JPEG than an image with a whole bunch of different colors. So if you're taking a picture of one flower and a blue sky, it will compress to a greater degree than a picture of a whole field of tulips with 100 different colors all over the place. JPEGs are great because they compress these files in such a way that generally, depending on the compression method, generally you can't see much of a difference when you're looking at it on a computer screen. If you printed off these JPEGs, you might be able to notice what's called jaggies. We don't hear that very much anymore, but in the old days you'd see jagged lines on the image. And you would notice it if you tried to expand the image too much, or if you tried to print it off at a high quality. But for the most part, nowadays, our JPEGs are images that we see on websites, that we will email to friends, that we'll post on Facebook or Twitter. And so we want those files to be as small as possible. This was particularly important back in the early days of the internet, when we were all on dial-up, and you didn't want to send a 10 megabyte image file to somebody. You wanted to send a 500 kilobyte file to somebody. Even that took a long time. So these compression formats were very, very useful in the early days of the internet. They're also valuable nowadays, even with high speed, because it makes websites that have graphics on them load faster. If you ever had to sit around and wait for the graphics to show up on a website, you'll understand why we appreciate, even with high-speed internet access, JPEGs where graphics pop up right away. Mosquito says, I hate JPEG compression. It's ugly as sin, especially on the web. Mosquito's a designer, so he notices this stuff where you and I actually wouldn't notice it very much. So you can set your camera to shoot in one of two formats, JPEG or RAW. A JPEG file is compressed. It's heavily compressed in your computer or in your camera. So it's just squished all up. So let's say you've got a 10 megabyte file that when you push the shutter button, there's a 10 megabyte file on your on the processor, on the sensor, and then the computer inside your camera turns that into a 1 megabyte file. And that 1 megabyte file you can then email off to other folks, post on Flickr or Twitter or Facebook, whatever it is. That's great. Your camera also shoots in RAW. Actually, your camera only shoots in one format. It shows you JPEGs or RAW files. RAW files can be huge. They can be multi-megabyte files. My camera generally shoots 25 megabyte file sizes. Other cameras shoot even larger than that. The RAW format is exactly what it sounds like. It's raw. It's uncompressed. There's no data has been thrown away. So all the data that your camera sensor saw is in that file. It's all complete in that file. I always tell folks that RAW and JPEG are like cookie dough and chocolate chip cookies. RAW file is the cookie dough. It's the eggs and the flour and the sugar and the salt and the baking soda and the chocolate chips all spread out. It's all of it. Nothing's missing. A JPEG is the cookie itself. It's already baked. You can't make changes to the cookie once it's baked. You can't add chocolate chips. You can't take out salt. You can't do anything to the cookie. It's fully, completely baked. And there are advantages and disadvantages to both file formats. The advantage of a RAW file format is all the data that the sensor saw is in that file format. And I can mess around with that data. We've all heard the old line, garbage in, garbage out, or good data in, good data out. That's what happens when I take a RAW file out of my camera and bring it in Lightroom. I can mess around with it a whole lot more. If it's cookie dough, I can add more chocolate chips. I can add a little bit more salt. I can add more egg or flour, whatever it is I want to do with it. I can take stuff out. I can manipulate a RAW file in the edit much, much more so than I can a JPEG. As my kind of photographer, that's what I want. I want the ability to manipulate that file. As we said before, the Mosquito says it's a much better metaphor than the celery with cream cheese. Holy crap, Mo, you've been listening to the show for a long time. I used that metaphor like 10, 15 years ago, dude. Oh, dear. MacMan says, I usually describe RAW as the negative and JPEG as the print. That works too. That works too. I've always told beginning shooters that one of the reasons why you'll see one of these beautiful sunsets and you'll take a picture of it and look at the picture and go, well, that looks like crap. I need a better camera. Well, no, it's because your eyes and your brain are a better camera than your iPhone or your DSLR. Your eyes and your brain see more color, see more shadows, see more gradients. Your eyes and your brain have a greater dynamic range than your camera does. So it sees more light in general. So what happens is I'll take that beautiful sunset picture and then I'll bring it into Lightroom. And because I'm working on the RAW file, I'm able to add more color, to subtract the shadows, to increase the contrast or decrease the vibrance or mess around with the photo much more so than I am able to do with a JPEG. A JPEG, you can do that to a certain degree, but not nearly as much as you can with a RAW file. So I tell folks, let's assume you're a good photographer. Let's assume that your shots are well composed and they end up looking good on the back of the camera. If you don't want to edit your shots, if you have no interest in messing around with Lightroom or Elements or Photos or whatever editing software it might be, then don't shoot RAW. Shoot JPEG. If your photos are going to automatically get posted somewhere with no editing, there's no point in shooting RAW. Only shoot RAW if you're going to edit. Because otherwise you're just wasting your time. Because what happens is, if you shoot RAW and aren't going to edit, well, your file's going to have to be turned into JPEGs anyway, either in the camera or in software. So you might as well let the camera do it. Right? A lot of folks will say that pros all shoot in RAW. And that's why you should shoot in RAW. That's not true. Many pros, especially high-speed pros, shoot JPEG. For example, sports photographers, guys who are on the sidelines of a football game, who have got to get the photos posted on a website or to a newspaper almost instantly. They shoot JPEGs because they know they can get the composition right in the camera. They don't got to worry about cropping and things like that. I was on the sidelines of a football game, and I watched these guys, and they'll shoot 100 frames in 4 or 5 seconds, 10 seconds of a play, fill a camera card up inside 5 minutes, hand the camera card off to the photo assistant, who then has like a pocket full of these cards. The photo assistant will run up to a photo editing booth, hand that to an editor. The editor will go through all the photos, pick out 1 or 2 good ones, send those off to the newspaper or to Sports Illustrated or to ESPN's website, and those photos will get posted right away. Because they need speed, they can't use the huge file sizes of a RAW. They need JPEGs. Now they're going to shoot in high quality JPEG, but they need JPEGs. You can see the difference in RAW and JPEG in your own camera. In the settings file, almost all of our cameras are going to have one of these windows, either on the top or on the back. And that window will tell you how many photos your card can take. So in your settings menu, set your shooting file format to RAW and look at the number. So for me, for example, I can do this and it will tell me that I can get 387 RAW shots on this card. When I switch it to JPEG, let me just change that to that and that. It tells me I can get 999 plus. It doesn't go to 1,000. So I can get 900 shots on the exact same card. There's the file size difference right there. So it's a third just with every single shot. So if you're going to edit, shoot in RAW. If you're already a good photographer and don't need to do much editing or don't want to do any editing, shoot in JPEG. The file sizes will be significantly smaller. The image quality will be a little bit less. You probably won't notice, though. That's going to be the issue when it comes to quality. I'll show you an example of that on my... Where did I put it? Where did I put it? It was here a second ago. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? I had a folder of... Oh, crap. Beep, 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 beep. Yes, there it is. Okay. All right. One of the things that messes up beginners, though, is that you will look at a RAW file and get confused because when you see the RAW file on your computer, it doesn't look as good as you imagine it to be. I'm just trying to dig this photo up to show you guys. So here is an example of that. This is a bald eagle. Now, to be clear, this is a static bald eagle. This is the image right out of the camera. Now, this is a eagle that's on a stand. He's not wild or running around like a crazy eagle. Excuse me. This eagle is not tamed, but is get rid of that so you guys don't get to see that. So this shot was composed exactly the way I wanted it. I loved the way the eagle was looking. I loved the background. I loved everything about it. But when I brought the image, the raw image, out of my camera and brought it into Lightroom, I saw it and went, the colors are gone. The colors have been drained out of this image. There's no vibrancy to it. But because I knew I was shooting in RAW, I knew all I had to do was just use the Lightroom controls to bump up the colors. This more closely resembles what I saw that day. Here's the RAW file, and this file is 25 megabytes. And here is the edited file. Notice the difference in the feathers, in particular, around the white and brown right at that border. There's no detail there in the RAW file. It's actually there, but I needed the software to bring it out. Same with this shot here. Look at the detail in the feathers around the bird's neck and the beautiful color of the eyes and the beak. Those weren't in the RAW file, but I was easily able to bring them out in the RAW file. So that's what I mean by you take that image and it doesn't look as good as your eye did. When you bring it into software, you can then increase any number of variables and decrease others. So you can bring up the shadows. You can bring down the contrast. You can increase the color saturation. You can make it look better. So that's why you want to shoot. That's why I tell folks, if you want to edit, shoot in RAW. If you're worried about your card filling up, just buy extra cards. Nowadays, 32 gigabyte cards are fairly inexpensive. You can get them for about $20. You should always have 3 or 4 of them lying around. At least 2 in your bag. I'm lucky in that my D600 has 2 card slots, and I can use them both for cards that shoot RAW. You can. Now, I don't recommend getting bigger cards than 32 gigabytes, because I always had this fear that if you fill up a 64 gigabyte card and then lose that card, you lost 64 gigabytes. I'd rather fill up 2 32 gigabyte cards, because then if I lose one, I won't lose 32 gigs. It's just a personal preference for me. MacMan says, RAW is wonderful when you derp and set the white balance wrong. Another example of why you would want to shoot in RAW. There's this thing called white balance. And if you shoot in RAW, you don't got to worry about it. Doesn't matter. But if you shoot in JPEG and don't set your white balance, and you can do this in your own home, you can do this at the office. Go and set your white balance to sunny skies and then take a picture inside under fluorescent lights. It will look awful because the white balance wasn't set properly. But if I did that, if I set my white balance to sunny skies and then shot under fluorescent lights in RAW, I can easily make that change in Lightroom. It's not a big deal. It's why my white balance is always set to auto, because I don't care what the white balance is in the camera. I know I can fix it in Lightroom. MacMan says, took a bunch of shots of the Pacific Ocean while in California with the white balance set wrong. They were all blue from the water. 3 clicks and they were fixed. So if you ever had that problem where you've shot and everything looks too yellow or too blue or too something, you can fix that using white balance. As always, if you have any questions about photography in general or anything we talked about tonight specifically, please let me know. I want to send a big shout out to Marilyn and Richard. They are the parents of Wayne back home in Nova Scotia. It was great talking to them this past weekend. They took one of my classes, the Learn to Take Better Images no matter what camera you have. And Wayne says, for anyone who's remotely interested in photography or knows anyone who is, I highly recommend Shawn's course. My parents found him very informative, approachable, etc. Thank you for that, Wayne. I'm very glad your parents enjoyed the class. I had a blast talking to them too. If you want the class for yourself, or Wayne bought it for his dad as a birthday present, send me an email to Shawn@yourmaclifeshow.com. We'll work something out. We did it on demand. Wayne's parents were available on a Sunday at 9 a.m. my time, 1 p.m. their time back home in Nova Scotia. We set it up by Google Hangouts. We had a great time talking for a couple hours. So please, if you'd like to do that, let me know. Let's see what other questions we did get from you guys this week regarding photography. Paul says, what's a good camera for mainly taking pictures of nature and traveling? It depends on what kind of nature you're talking about, Paul. If you're talking about birds and up-close animal type things, then you're going to want probably something with a zoom lens on it. And for traveling, you want something small and light. So you're looking at two completely different things. A zoom lens is going to be bigger and heavier, but you're talking about wanting to travel, so you might want something a little bit smaller. I'd say look at the Canon Rebel line or the Nikon D3300. I always recommend these because these are good beginner cameras, but you can get different lenses on them, and you can swap the lenses out. So when you want to travel light, you put a smaller lens on it. When you want to go into nature, you could put a bigger lens on it. So that might help. Susan says, what types of cameras and features replicate or do something similar to portrait mode on the iPhone 7 Plus? That's really easy. That is simply a factor of your aperture setting. Read your manual or go on YouTube and learn how to set your camera's aperture. The iPhone's aperture is set to only be 2.2. That's a very small number, but it means it's a very big hole. And that big hole, which lets lots of light come through, is what causes that nice blurry background. I can show it to you right here on the photo of the eagle. You see how that background is you can't tell what that background is. You don't know if that's trees or a building or anything. That was intentional on my part. I set the camera with a very, very small aperture number, but that small number reflects a large opening. And because that large opening allows the light to come through, it made the background really blurry. It's also a factor of how far away the background is from your subject. So I'm focused on the eagle, and the background in this case was probably 10, 15 feet away. So it made it all nice and blurry. The closer that background got to the eagle, the less blurry it would be, which makes sense because if my focus point is the eagle, the closer the background gets to that focus point, the more likely it's going to be in focus. So if you want to mess around and create your own portrait effects on your DSLR, just decrease your aperture to the lowest number it can be. Alternately, just go to portrait mode on your camera. If your camera has scenes on it, and again, read your manual to see if it does this. If your camera has the ability to show scenes or scene modes, one of those scene modes is going to be portrait mode. So it's simple. Just flip your camera to portrait mode, and portrait mode will then automatically make your background blurry. Hopefully that helps. Macman says, I need to find a lens for when I go to the Grand Canyon. I was thinking something along a 12-24. Yeah, Macman, you're going to want, if that's the kind of wide open vista shots you want to get, you're definitely going to want to get at least a 12-24. Remember, you can also rent lenses. I'm a big fan of renting lenses, either from a local shop or from the nice folks at lensprotogo.com or camerarentals.com. Either one of those two companies will ship the lens to you, which is a really nice kind of thing. And it also gives you the ability to rent a lens you could never afford, or a lens that you're never going to buy. You know, that 12-24 is only good for the most part for wide open vista landscape shots. Maybe you're not a landscape shooter. Maybe this is the only time, or one of the rare times, you're going to be in a landscape environment. So renting a lens for $50, $100 a week, whatever it might be, is a much better investment than spending $500, $1,000, $2,000 on a lens you might only use once a year. He's just looking at Lens Pro to go now. I would have it shipped to my friend's house in Phoenix. Yeah, that's a great idea. I used to have them shipped to me at the hotels. Lens Pro to go would ship it to my hotel in San Francisco or in New York or in Las Vegas, wherever I happened to be. It was a really convenient way to do that. Another email from this is a question for hopefully some of you folks can help. This is from our friend Don Beck, donbeck.org, Don Beck on Twitter. I've got a database question. I'm not sure if you can help me, but maybe one of your listeners can. I'm currently using FileMaker Pro version 6 for doing billing for 2 of my businesses and one of my wife's. This version doesn't work on newer versions of OS X, so I have an older MacBook I keep just to run these apps. I don't use these often enough to justify buying a newer version of FileMaker, but I would like to update the OS on the MacBook. Therefore, I'm looking for a database app that will do the following. It should be a relational database because each of my applications has several tables. The main requirement is that I have a graphical user interface similar to FileMaker. Specifically, one of my applications has a commercial form that has to be filled in with info from several tables. I need to be able to have a PDF of this form in the background and then create fields over the various questions in the form that can be populated from my tables. I then need to be able to print these forms out so it looks like I typed the information into the original form. Lastly, it would be great if I could export my old files and import them into the new system. I suspect that this would be relatively easy and not the most important part. Anyone help Don? I haven't used relational databases in 20 years, and even then it was FileMaker Pro back in the day. If anyone knows, send me an email and I'll pass it on to Don, or you can contact Don on Twitter at Don Beck, Donbeck, or via his website, donbeck.org. Hopefully, Don, someone out there is a database person and can help you out. My friend Maurice Chevalier there in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, says, I'm writing about your VIA commentary on last night's show. Unfortunately, VIA no longer runs from Calgary to Vancouver, but rather from Edmonton, Jasper, Kamloops, and on to Vancouver. The Calgary-Banff-Vancouver run was sold back in the late 80s by the Mulroney government to a private company, the Rocky Mountaineer. That said, the VIA route through the Rockies is still a very nice trip, just not the crown jewel of Banff. Enjoying the podcast, Maurice. I kind of knew that, Maurice. I remembered that for some bizarre reason, money, obviously, the government had sold that Calgary-Banff-Vancouver leg to a third-party company. Hugely expensive. It's called the Rocky Mountaineer. I see the train go by every now and then. $3,500 per person. It's like a cruise ship through the Rockies. It's a real shame that they did that, because that was a great route for average everyday Canadians to go on. It's a shame that that happened, because it was the route I took when I first moved to Vancouver and really enjoyed it. Folks, that's it. Thank you guys very much for joining me. Wait a minute. Hang on. MacMan says, not bad. The Nikon 1424 f2.8 is only $155 for a week rental. That's not cheap, but that's a good lens. The f2.8, that's going to be a good lens. Monty says, I don't know of anything that does that the way FileMaker Pro does it. Certainly not as simply as FileMaker does. Yeah, that's my concern too, Monty, is that everything else that could do that's going to be a lot more complicated than FileMaker. I think Don, I know you're listening, it might be better to upgrade your FileMaker Pro, and wouldn't that be a tax write-off, the cost of FileMaker Pro? I don't know. MacMan says, lens rental has it for $140. MacMan, check lens rental whether the shipping price is included in that price tag, because I know that's happened to me before, that I went and thought, oh, lens rental is cheaper, but Lens Pro to Go includes the shipping charges. So that might be where the $15 difference would be for you. The other thing is check with your local camera shops. They might have also a deal too, or camera shops in Phoenix where you can pick that up. But anyway, you're looking about $150 for the week, which is not cheap, but it's going to be a great lens for you. You're going to get some great shots with that lens. Folks, that's it for tonight's show. I want to say thanks very much to you guys for joining me here this Wednesday evening, as always, or via the archive if you so choose. And still, remember, if you want to take the camera class, it's $75 for about 2.5 hours. I got a great review from Wayne's parents, and what more could you want than that? A couple of Nova Scotians said this was a good idea. And if you can't trust Nova Scotians, who can you trust? That's it for me for tonight. As always, thank you guys very much for joining me. I've been Shawn King, and you've been listening to Your Mac Life. See ya!